Leonard Neufeldt graduated summa cum laude from Waterloo Lutheran University, Wilfrid Laurier, and received his MA and PhD in the USA. He was appointed Professor of American Studies at Purdue University in 1978. He and his wife have spent most of their professional years in America and abroad, notably in Europe and Turkey. Lecture tours have taken Leonard to India, Germany, Korea, and China. Rootless lives may be as endemic to the Canadian and American West as root-bound ones, he laments. But in a world of change, there seems little defense for either condition. I'm going to pass you over to Candace James of Silver Bow Publishing for a few words.
Yes, it's my extreme pleasure to be here to hear Leonard read from Passport, which is the third book of his that we published. And it's wonderful poetry, of course. Leonard's a man of mastering letters and words and putting them down on paper and pages, and it's just a delight to listen to anything Leonard writes. And also it's nice because Leonard and I both had our first books published through Fiddlehead Poetry Books way back when. We didn't know that until just recently. So we're stable mates from long ago and far away. Anyway, I now will turn it over to Leonard so he can thrill your thirsty ears. Go ahead, Leonard.
Thanks very much, Candace, and thank you, Carol. I feel very much at home on this screen. We've seen each other now in a number of broadcasts recently. At my last reading, I noted Rumi's comment that poetry is not simply about an experience. A poem is itself an experience. I'd like to expand on that just with a few sentences today. The privacy of the personal, yet openness. That seems to be a certified paradox, but it isn't paradoxical at all. I suggest that for the poet, words and poems open mysteries of our life in the world, of intimacies, of transactions between a private me and our large human, cultural, and natural not me. This opening up through poetry is a reaching out, making contact, becoming the experience of that contact. A Walt Whitman poem puts it this way: there was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became, and that object became part of him for a day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. The words of this reaching out do not double back into themselves. Instead, contact with its reverberations of disclosure is the poem's personal yet shared meaning. That meaning can go deep. At times, it will be dark. Let me start with a poem that mirrors the beginning of Whitman's There Was a Child Went Forth. The child is 2 years old. I still have vague memories of him. The poem is titled Little Shadow Boy. Walking before he learned to crawl, and one might say the morning sun laid his shadow down, head to toe next to footprints in the dew-drenched lawn. I could write this down, then scratch it out, but I'll let myself be the boy again with what he finds out. The shadow doesn't move, and then it does when he stumbles forward and down to its dark summons to prod it, bury his tiny index finger in it, and leave words belonging to him alone. He will let the shadow reach into him so he can hold it with both arms. Let it steady him. Take it with him as he tries to stand and run, but slumps again to knees and hands. a second invitation for the shadow to complete the feeling of its chill on his arms, now wearing it. He leans back, rubs his ear, gathers himself, rises to nowhere until he sees the closed door, until he steps back and to the side. The shadow is still in front, still clinging to his feet, although the knob of his wrist and hand tell it a word he was taught. Go. Stop holding him. The shadow saying nothing, not even don't forget any of this. There are many things not written in books, and there will always be more than enough that I don't write about. So much left behind, still waiting. The boy is on his knees again. In the next poem, a much older observer goes forth in a much larger world, and the world becomes part of him for the day or for many years. The poem is titled The Bosporus. The Bosporus is one of the busiest waterways in the world, connecting the Aegean and Sea of Marmara with the Black Sea. This part of the world has become part of the observer. You could have started elsewhere, later, warmth and sound fattening everything. Where you stand, Asia, and morning, do not ask if you are willingly chilled, but from here you can look all around at the ghostly real. To the right, the northern mouth of the Bosporus, smoking dawn's red breath, and a sea's black entrance, silent as underwater ruins. Someone calls once from the slope behind and above, and there was a time when you might have answered, regardless of who was calling whom. You have learned to watch without words, until the words find you like the lights sudden on to your left in the restaurant of red trumpet flowers and windows mirroring a latitude of wakefulness. Ahead, at the top of stairs where the railing begins, a sign's warning, Dikat, of dangerous steps down. The three-word behest showing through a maze of graffiti colors. On the opposite shore, bluffs and villas begin to form in the groping shimmer and shadow of seafront margins, somnambulating into view with moments of half-hidden mansions, unsure of how far to crowd down to the waterline. The shore of Europe, just inside of time. You watch the main street, sea-to-sea channel freighted with commerce that bears new worlds as well as old vaguely along. Their deep currents of cross-purpose and grievance, never exhausting themselves or a need of countless wars to stir up memories of how to keep things apart, urging days and years to be on watch. The spine's memory board alive. Yesterday, as evening opened itself to the black smudge of tankers coming and going low in the water or riding high with rust past puny fishing boats returning to their jetty, one day less in their life, the late hour befell you with a sign of the times, as with, if this had been a real emergency, immaculate gray of a stars and stripes frigate of the future and its escorts of war and peace gliding past the musings whale with hardly a sound, ignoring the call to prayer as you watched an argosy's wake subside into a sea's wide reach. And minutes ago, the mist gave way to perfectly large white numbers and the Russian tricolor, missile-fitted destroyer, sailors in place, like small chess pieces ready for the next match, a heavily laden, war-worn transport fuming close behind, its slim freeboard margin focusing the mind on more than Archimedes' principle. The Turkish Coast Guard following in the wide trough of swells, parsing this passage with binocular strictness and a red trim on white reminder. Following like you as the sun yellows upward through the mist to its own side of day. This world so much older than you, so settled, so unsettled, has found you with its leftovers of past and present, chance being at one with choice. The sun rises on your readiness to name what's here, to rename remainders, especially unspeakable ones. And it's you who steps forward to the sign at the stairs and beyond. This morning does not tempt whatever will be to harbor more than destinations. But in an hour or two, people will crowd the Bosphorus, and only some of them will know how indifferent rage of empires and intimacies of genocide have always begun as an ending, as its baseline. If you travel from the Bosphorus a few degrees east of north across the Black Sea, you reach the southern shores of Ukraine, and just a bit east of that, the southern shore of Russia. The next poem was composed 5 weeks ago on a day when Russian troops encircled Molochansk, where more than 100 years ago, my grandmother, Margareta Klippensteinens, was born and raised, a place she left just in time. Ukraine. At first light, he did as he was told, summoned wife and 2 young sons outside to where he stood in Sunday air. They shot his family one by one. 2 shots needed for his wife, to teach him a lesson he would not forget. And no villagers forgot. 100 years ago, their children said, old now, and just standing there and looking all around as if expecting someone. The next poem serves as the title poem of this volume, Passport. Flying home from Turkey several years ago, we had to stay over in Amsterdam because of bad flying weather, and we took the opportunity to take in Dam Square, the center of old Amsterdam. My wife's ancestors, as well as mine, hark back to the North Netherlands. Forced migrations are part of her family history, as they are of mine. And working with refugees is an important late chapter in her family history. This other language, so close to the old Low German you and I understand, slow-walked, sheltered parts of ourselves across wet, spotted washboard cobblestones, through the obelisk's pencil shade of other times, across Amsterdam's Dam Square, swept clean as always by slow throttle motorized brooms. So much mattered here ages ago about merchants, God's will, and what we are made of. Dissenters confessed or refused to, Arminians, Jews, and Anabaptists, until concerned Calvinists had whipped unmitigated free will into hiding just in time for ancestors to leave in the dark of centuries ago, to let the old church and royal palace inure the future here. Although the clock tower tolls the present hour, and Queen Juliana left the palace and royal rule to others decades ago, the queen who declared your uncle a rescuer of refugees and exiles, and a knight. There are people we know who try to be someone else or an equivalent when they meet each other, but he retired to a house modest as the green hills of Pennsylvania, in a village where streets that begin also end, like your visits with him. The palace bell tower still commands air and earth for a moment's reckoning or needless concern, like your suddenness. I wonder when our passports expire. We fingered them out of deep cargo pockets, yet both of us knew those small blue comforts have pages and years left, unlike a refugee we had met here. His fear outfitted with envy, spent English words, and expired visa. The difference between a passport and this chap's visa, you murmured, is the pain still keening long after futile studies of a foreign language at night for a place in another world, and then another language for another place, as my father did before he simply fled when he still could. I couldn't settle every one of your word by strange words, reliving more than mere losses, but I nodded. I'd grown up between some of them. And I want to know about your shirt and tie father's journalistic years in Canada, whether any of them called heaven to witness their own kind of free will, no matter how fateful the news, arraigning days bitten things thin by attention as he proofread once again past midnight his introduction to the next batch of letters from refugees he would publish tomorrow or a day after, without excuse, without comfort. I'll change the pace, or better said, the tone and mood, as well as the subject, and read, we strongly prefer experimental verse. This poem was probably inspired by a Canadian magazine inviting submissions. They asked for experimental verse only. It may also have been inspired by a performance in the Symphony Hall in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The entire program was dedicated to contemporary musical works, some of them wonderful, and some of them certainly not so. We strongly prefer experimental verse. Your sight is better than your hearing, and trouble can come of that. When the chandeliers of the theaters half dark find a head of frizzled orange and green by halves, 3 seats over, cradling a tower of coat folds, program glints, paperback, stilettos, and bucket hat. A small lurch into the back of her seat pulls them closer. A slight tilt, but they ride in place with her closed eyelids as the violin's cadenza of a body's disarrangement outdoes the conductor with its own atonal fury, pizzicato's faint caterwaul of bow upside down on all 4 strings, loud knock on wood, and skating to the bridge on the E string at the speed of stage lights, cross-hatching the syncopation of violin and heads crowded close in front. The tower leaning more by fractions toward Pisa. Her movement mute, uncommissioned, unrehearsed, yet breathtaking as Dame Evelyn Glennie's perfect percussive balance, double dared by the kettle drum's blunder in the pause, and the orchestra's final home to havoc exploding in disaccords, crash of silence, intermittent ripples of applause. We're into the 3rd year of pandemic poems. The last section of this volume is titled A Journal of the Plague Years. I'll read 2 poems from this section. The first, titled Fear. Neither your breakfast cough nor the intangible dreams between your night intervals or the latest body count have helped you herd his fears into submission. and letting him by first as you open the door to step outside in time for your usual survey is not an act of assurance. There is little to see, outline and shape gone. You inhale and exhale the cold morning fog as deeply as you can. But you are losing the argument. You are breathing the air he just exhaled. And finally, the quiet of the field. The lockdown not over, I wonder, like others, what I have lost. Surgical mask below my chin. I stand sentry in the roadside grass, tracking the far-off crawl of tractor, disc harrow, and dust as the horizon separates and draws them on over the bench of hill to below clouds that remake loopholes in an open and close of blue, there again, and giving out. A skein of light streams up the hill as tractor and rider re-emerge from the far side, etching the field's suddenness of fragile sun-struck glory with a black shining that follows in a seam on the move, unzippered, light and dark, station to station, crossing over like memory, slowly repeating itself. The methodical growl of a truck passes behind me, its whisk of wind too close. The sucked-in breath. I turn back to the quiet of the field. Light narrows to a razor-edge phosphorescence, retreating as a bright new relinquishment to a darkening foothill haze of green and color-drained slopes of Mount Tahoma. The mountain's headdress and cloudship canopy prophesying storm. Sooner or later, farmers, weather, mutating pathogens, and the seasons themselves are in a time of prophecy. For every prophecy, there is a season, and we are in it. Inside our voices, pulling predictions dead ahead in firm lines, darkening outcomes in a world of hacked warning systems. This day began alone, nothing to make up to what has been and will be. And it may not be long enough once more to teach me quiet, that purest of loves, easily lost and therefore always new, ready for what happens when no one is here to watch with me, a still small breath of aloneness that even the imperfect heart knows, a passionate quiet that will not last, yet comes again. Thank you.